Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
It was a bombshell that happened in the last 24 hours, and that is New York City Mayor Eric Adams indicted after federal corruption probe. There's video and pictures of officers raiding Gracie Mansion, where the mayor lives. It's something. It is definitely a moment here in New York political history. So we wanted to talk to Scott Stringer, former New York City Comptroller, on all of this. Scott, the latest that we've heard is that Mayor Adams is going to fight this. He definitely doesn't look like he's resigning. What is your take on that?
Look, I think he should and must fight it. This is his life, and he has to have full focus on a very serious federal indictment. But that is what he has to do for himself. Unfortunately, you can't govern the city and fight the indictment, and that is why he should step aside for the good of the city. I presume no guilt or no innocence. That's for the courts to decide. But I do think we have to be laser focused on the city. Look, the business community in particular has invested billions of dollars in the financial capital of the world called New York City. We have citizens, middle-class people who are struggling to pay their rent, struggling to get their kids through school. The job of mayor is to be that person who works every single day laser focused. That cannot happen anymore in an administration where not only is the mayor indicted, but almost the entire leadership team is under some indictment or federal investigation. So with great respect to the mayor, recognizing innocent until proven guilty, it is time to step aside. We've got to govern this town in a way that's never been governed before. And I think he's got to just step back.
And Scott, if he doesn't do that, what's your view on the timeline of how these events can unfold? Because I just think back to last November when the FBI agents raided the home of an Adams campaign fundraiser. That's really what kickstarted that, and that's 10 months in the rearview mirror.
Well, look, at the end of the day, that's what investigations are for. I mean, the federal government has obviously taken time to look at all of this. They're announcing charges probably as we speak. And my concern as a citizen, as a public school parent, as somebody who's managed the finances of the city for 8 years, this is a tender moment for New York. We have to send a signal internationally that we are open and ready for business. We cannot play the political game back and forth. We need strong leadership now. We need leadership in finance. We need leadership to actually get things done. Look, I love this city. This is a sad day for me, but I've seen corruption scandals over the years. I've fought corruption my entire life, and it's a very sad moment at this point that we have to be going through this.
So there's a couple of things to unpack to that with me. So as a parent of a child in public school, I totally hear you on that. In terms of a business or a CEO making an investment in New York City, I'm struggling to see how this really moves the needle, in that a lot of us are now desensitized to these kind of indictments and scandals, rightly or wrongly. When you have a former president also accused and convicted of crimes, everyone here is like, yeah, okay, and then let's move on. So is it really going to impact it in the way that maybe 20 years ago we would or should have?
Well, I'm not going to give up on the sensibilities of both the American public and certainly New York City residents. First of all, we New Yorkers, we get this stuff. We are savvy. We've seen it all. So I don't think this is going to sit well with the public. I don't think people are going to shrug their shoulders walking to work today saying, it doesn't matter. I don't think Trump's getting reelected, in part because he's had criminal conduct. I think people want stable leadership. I mean, let's talk about the public schools. We have kids who are still struggling with COVID. I see the difference between parents who have some resources and parents that don't. The whole public housing developments are collapsing. We're not building affordable housing fast enough. And look, the job of mayor is to reach out and get to those entrepreneurs, the tech entrepreneurs, the communities that we rely on to jumpstart and pump up our economy. We want business leaders to say, you know what? we want that old New York City compact back. We will attract the best and the brightest to our workforce, but the job of mayor is to provide open space, public space, safety in the streets, safety in the subways, a real mental health initiative to help with homelessness. But also, we got to make sure that rather than tout a robot called K5 to do policing, we actually need a policing strategy that's fair but strong, and we have to meet these challenges. This mayor cannot focus on it because rightfully he's got to focus on a major federal indictment, and I don't blame him for doing that at all.
All right, Scott, we appreciate it. Thank you very much for that insight. Scott Stringer, former New York City Comptroller, joining us there.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
And want to get more with Dr. Basil Smikle. He's professor of practice at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. He's also former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party. He's been a political strategist and policy advisor for almost 20 years with local, international, and national experience. This is quite a bombshell here, Doctor. What do you think this means? How does this unfold? Can Eric Adams keep his seat?
Well, to the point that June just made, I mean, this wouldn't have happened had it not gone to the highest levels of the Department of Justice. So this is serious. It's serious. As a lifelong New Yorker, this is serious for me just as a voter and, with care and concern for my city. But if you saw his press conference earlier, he had a lot of supporters with him, and I think that's really what his future hinges on, not just the charges themselves, but politically, will his base stick with him? And we saw, some prominent Democratic leaders, particularly African-American leaders, standing behind him. So until we start to see more, if we ever see more prominent African-Americans, particularly from some of the communities that he did very well in his election, if they start out and saying that he needs to step down, he's unable to fulfill his duties, then I think you'll see the hastening of that decision. But for now, it sounds like he's dug his heels in, and I to this point, I don't really see this sort of watershed moment that would get him to step down.
Doctor, what is the governor's role, Governor Hochul's role in all this? Can she essentially fire him? Would she, if it comes to that? I mean, you mentioned sort of the political delicacy of it all, given his support within the African community and elsewhere.
And I think it does come down to that. She does have a role. There is a scenario where the governor can take him out of his seat. There's another sort of opportunity for that to happen by a separate committee, should that get formed. There's a long explanation about that. But yes, the governor can step in and take him out of office at some point. But given the fact that the governor has always had has had a tricky election just a couple of years ago where it was a lot closer than people expected. She relies heavily on the same base that Eric Adams has in New York City, and I don't know that she would make a decision to a very drastic decision like that without really checking with a lot of the key leaders in those communities across the city. Because if she were to do that sort of unilaterally, I think the blowback would be really significant, and she would feel it when she's up for re-election.
When you take a look at the indictment, what we heard from District Attorney Damian Williams, and then, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, when we also heard from New York City Mayor Eric Adams as well, his defense, what stacks up for you? Like, if you were with Eric Adams, like, what would you be saying? Like, how does the defense work? Like, we're going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep my day job. This isn't true. They're just kind of stalking me. Like, all of that. Does that hold real water?
Yeah, this is so the short answer for me is no, because for him to say that he's being targeted by the Justice Department, I would remind him that the president's own son, Hunter Biden's been indicted. So I don't think that holds a lot of water. Number one, he's also said that this is a retribution for his challenging of the Biden administration on his handling of migrants. And I would also say that I don't think that, given everything that's happening in our national politics right now, I don't think that the Biden administration nor the Democrats nationally have the kind of time to specifically be targeting him in this way. They've just got a lot of other things to do. He's also said that, this is that the ways in which he's been targeted are similar to what David Dinkins, the first African-American mayor of the city of New York, is similar to what he went through. And that bothers me a bit too, because number one, David Dinkins is not indicted. And number two, he also had an antagonist in Rudy Giuliani for the entire 4 years that he was mayor. And there was a tremendous racial undertone and overtone to that tension, which is not present here. But I will say that it is true that for a lot of African American voters, there is a significant amount of apprehension and concern around the ways that the community has been treated by the media and by law enforcement. That is something that has been well documented over the years. But I'm also very mindful, as an African American myself, I'm also mindful of how that is used and how that's leveraged in situations like this. So I would suggest that he stay away from those kinds of those defensive tactics and that narrative, and kind of just focus on saying that he still can run the city and he's still in charge, and this is the future and vision he has for the upcoming weeks. So I would stick to that.
Can a city as complex as New York City continue to operate with a mayor who's distracted by this, and with any number of other department leaders in New York City who just aren't there?
Well, I mean, that's one of the key concerns, because if you think about the biggest agencies, the most prominent agencies in New York, fire, police, Department of Health and Education, and, for full disclosure, the former schools chancellor who said he's resigning at the end of the year, I've known for 25 years. And he's wanted that job for pretty much his entire career. So for him to take that step, fairly significant. The rating of the current police commissioner's house, who himself is acting because the previous one stepped down because of the investigation. All of these challenges to running the city will be on the minds of voters in the next couple of weeks. My guess, however, is that there's going to be so much focus on the presidential that it'll be mitigated by that. But just after, and unless, of course, if something happens tragically, and I hope that doesn't happen, there will be more attention on his leadership. But what he has to wonder right now and hope for is that a lot of voters are going to be focused more on the presidential than on him. But once that happens, all eyes quickly turn back to him, because the mayoral primary is in June. So it's really right upon us. And just very quickly, there is a succession plan, and I think everybody should understand that the state and the state constitution, the city charter have a succession plan built in. If he were to step down, the New York City public advocate becomes the acting mayor.
All right, Doctor, we really appreciate it. That was extraordinarily helpful. Dr. Basil Smikle, a professor of practice in Columbia University School of Professional Studies, also former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts, or watch us live on YouTube.
So let's continue this story. Tom Orlik is Bloomberg Economics Chief Economist, and he joins us now. Now, Tom had lived in Beijing for a very long time. He was the chief China economics correspondent over at the Wall Street Journal. He also headed Bloomberg Economics coverage in China, Japan, and Korea. And now he joins us from D.C., but he has a long history of looking at these kind of interventions from the government as well as monetary authority. Hey, Tom, is this the end?
So I think we need to break it down into sort of two different problems. So the first problem is the cycle. And if we think about the cycle, well, growth was very weak. deflation was coming, markets were slumping, and this intervention by China's central bank and now the Politburo, well, it looks pretty decisive. The equity market has roared back higher. The Chinese yuan has strengthened. Bond yields have ticked up. And expectations for growth out to the end of 2024 and into 2025, well, they're a little bit stronger. So on the cycle, this is certainly a positive moment, maybe a decisive moment. The second set of issues, though, is around structure, right? And that's where we have to worry about the massive overhang of property supply, the shrinking workforce, the increasingly fractious relations with the United States. These are the factors which are going to be weighing on China's growth, not just in 2024 or 2025, but out into the next decade. And on those, well, nothing we've seen in the last few days really changes the picture.
Yeah, Tom, with that in mind, we're seeing a tremendous rally across assets, especially in China. Just looking at the Shanghai Composite, up 9%, more than 9% in the last 3 days. Does this have sticking power? It feels like in the past we've seen these moments where stimulus is kind of drummed up and China talks about injecting money into the economy, and then those moments are relatively fleeting.
So the last couple of years has seen what you might call a kind of steady drip of micro policy moves. The PBOC cuts interest rates by 10 basis points or 20 basis points. The PBOC frees up a bit more funds for China's banks to lend. The Ministry of Finance puts a bit more money in the pockets of local governments. What we've seen in the last few days is a kind of a package of more powerful measures rolled out at the same moment, and the Politburo, the 24 men who kind of call the shots on China's economy, coming out with some pretty sort of firm statements about how they want to turn the cycle round, halt the decline in property, give equities a boost, right? So if we think about markets, if we think about growth for the next few months, maybe even into early 2025, this is a pretty important move. If we think about those bigger structural problems, if we think about the millions and millions of empty homes in China, we think about the shrinking working age population, no, nothing which has happened so far is going to move the dial on those big structural problems.
And here's the question we've all been waiting for, right? When is China going to cut checks to people? I mean, they already mentioned that they were going to do it for their low incomes, just a one-off. But that's literally what needs to happen, no? So, when are they going to do that?
So it's a great question, Alix. I'm sure we're all familiar with the term pushing on a piece of string, right? At some point, there's just too much debt in the economy. And when you cut interest rates, well, because debt is already so high, no one rushes to borrow more, no one rushes to invest more, right? And I think that's almost where China is, right? Debt's really high, so rate cuts, they help a little bit, but there's certainly that pushing on a piece of string aspect to it. So if you really want to accelerate China's growth, what do you have to do? Well, the government has to open its checkbook and put money in households' pockets. Now, we've seen the Politburo say they're going to amp up fiscal stimulus. So it seems like the checkbook, the government wallet is starting to creak open. The question is, well, how much money are they going to put to work, and where are they going to put it to work? Is it going to be a kind of traditional infrastructure-style stimulus, let's build some more bridges, or is it going to be the consumer stimulus, let's put money in households' pockets so they can upgrade their home electronics, maybe switch to an electric vehicle?
All right, Tom, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Tom Orlik, Bloomberg Economics Chief Economist, joining us on the China Latest.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries worldwide. The news that broke yesterday is that OpenAI is going to transition from being a nonprofit organization to a for-profit company. I have no idea what that means, but the goal of the company was supposed to, quote, benefit humanity as a whole, unconstrained by a need to generate financial return. If that changes, what does that do to the actual company? Joining us now is Mandeep Singh, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Tech Industry Analyst, joins us now. Okay, I don't get it. What does it mean?
Well, I mean, they've been looking to do that for a while in terms of becoming, a profitable company similar to other tech companies that are out there. And I guess we had hints all along because they never open sourced their model. They are the leaders when it comes to generative AI. And there are two approaches right now with companies keeping their model proprietary versus open source. And they are one of those who have kept it proprietary. So it's not a surprise that they wanted to convert to a profit structure, given all this has happened. I think the bigger thing here is the CTO, Mira Murati, leaving, and pretty much all the co-founders of the company leaving at this point, with Sam Altman being the only one there. So that's, to me, is the bigger news.
Capitalism strikes again. But real question, though, if it's valued around $150 billion, and you mentioned CTO Mira Murati resigning, does she keep her stock? Like, is she leaving the company with a nest egg worth a few $1 billion?
Well, again, I think once the entity changes, there are a lot more things that will happen subsequently in terms of, the new profitable structure, what sort of equity Sam Altman would have. So in terms of the prior structure, they already had a subsidiary which was profitable. So it's a pretty convoluted structure. So when the November thing happened, November 2023, when Sam Altman was asked to leave and then he came back, at that time they changed the board composition and they created a profitable subsidiary. Now this is like converting the full company to a profitable entity, and there will be changes that will come along. So hard to say exactly who keeps what at this point of time, but suffice to say that, the Microsoft relationship would come into play as well. I mean, they are one of the biggest stakeholders in the company, and all the signs are they want more investors in the company. So Sam Altman is trying to raise more money, and it will be at a higher valuation, $150 billion that's expected. And at some point, I think they will go public as well.
When you brought up the CTO leaving, well, wasn't that also expected? Hasn't she stayed on longer than everyone had anticipated? Because she covered for Sam Altman when he was out, so it was understood that she was leaving once he came back.
Well, I mean, I look at it this way. Again, it's from the outside. I obviously am not privy to anything that's going on inside the company, but there is clearly some tension, whether it's tied to the, the profitable or non-profitable aspect, or any other risks related to large language models, whether it's come down to safety issues or copyright issues. We don't know that level of transparency. And I think the fact that all the co-founders have left, clearly there is disagreement and tension, and we can only speculate from the outside, but it's never a good sign when, the core team that started the company, these are the technical guys who have left. So Sam Altman is the face of the company, he's the CEO, but these are the real technical guys who built the product. So, look, they have a big bench, and the company is much bigger now. The fact that we haven't heard a lot about GPT-5, that worries me a little bit, because when you are a company like OpenAI who's leading the charge, you want that product roadmap to be out there. You want to set expectations. When is the next version of the large language model coming out? And I think that's where there could be delays.
All right, Mandeep, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Mandeep Singh joining us, Bloomberg Technology Senior Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast. Catch us live weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
In other news, Wells Fargo is said to send some Fed crucial review for lifting cap. Shares rise by about 2% to a session high. This is like the deal. It's like consistent things that Wells Fargo has to do, Bailey, in order to get that asset cap lifted so they can really start to grow again.
Exactly. And when you look at kind of some of these updates, so it's a big step in trying to kind of right the ship, if you will, for Wells Fargo. As you mentioned, stock right now up more than 4%. So when you see these sharp, immediate reactions, it's Wall Street obviously applauding those deals. And the big thing going forward is how can Wells Fargo kind of, again, reemerge from some of those issues that they had a number of years ago, and the kind of reworking of the company that's been taking, I believe it's just over 5 years, 6 years at this point, and trying to get over some of these regulatory sanctions. And obviously the stock, again, up 4%. I want to say it's been underperforming relative to some comps, but I'm waiting on my terminal to load right now.
And also the idea is that, you'd like to say that they do this one thing and the asset cap is lifted, but in actuality, it's going to be chipping away at compliance, transparency, getting all their ducks in a row, and that it takes a lot of time. Not to be bested, there is other breaking news here. Fed Vice Chair for Supervision Michael Barr delivers in a speech that he says that the Fed is exploring liquidity rule tied to uninsured deposit. Now, that rule would address those constraints on hold-to-maturity assets, part of the issue that brought down SVB at the end of the day. You have an asset on your books, you're holding them for safety, you're going to hold them till the end of the term, yet when rates move violently up or down, it really creates a disparity then in that asset price. You also have potential requirements that could complement some of the existing rules, exploring some large bank requirement on minimum liquidity. So many things happening. It's so exciting. Good thing Alison Williams is here. Bloomberg Intelligence Chief U.S. Banks Asset Manager person. She covers all of these things. Just in terms of Wells Fargo moving forward to lifting the cap, in your estimate, like how close is Wells Fargo to actually being able to lift their asset cap?
It's it's tough to say. Certainly this has been unprecedented, right? I mean, this began with a fine in 2016. I think Wells Fargo initially thought it would be a few months. It's been several years. One of the biggest things I think, one of the biggest changes I thought was, they changed over the board. They brought in all new management. Charlie Scharf as the CEO. He was sort of the third CEO in a short time period, but almost fully turned over the board, brought in a lot of ex-JP Morgan people. And then it's just been sort of blocking and tackling since. And we've seen a number of the consent orders get resolved, but there still are a few more out there that they need to take care of.
Yeah, just looking at the Bloomberg News story, it stands out the cap's lifespan so far. JP Morgan has swelled 64% to more than $4 trillion of assets, meaning they've added almost an entire Wells Fargo to the balance sheet. What's the timeline for Wells Fargo to potentially catch up? Is that possible? How would that work out?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, there was, a lost opportunity, right? So I think the biggest, the biggest hurt from the asset cap was during COVID, when JP Morgan and Bank of America were able to add all these retail deposits, right? And Wells Fargo really could not participate because they did, but it was a lot more work, right? Because it wasn't the loan side of the balance sheet. It was really the deposit side of the balance sheet that was a constraint because they were growing so rapidly. And they did do things to try to manage their balance sheet in the most profitable way, getting rid of things like non-operational deposits that are, less profitable and less valuable long-term than core deposits. They have sold off businesses over time. So, I mean, but for banks such as Bank of America and JP Morgan, granted, some of those balances did go away over time. But they were able to retain at least, some of those customers. And so I would say that's where sort of the big harm from the asset cap has come from. If you fast forward to today, the balance sheet constraint is not as significant. They have started investing in businesses like card and trading where they're under index, so they are growing their businesses. So if the cap was removed, that would certainly give them more flexibility in those businesses. But on the deposit point, that's really sort of a lost opportunity.
Yeah. Alison, thank you. You weren't booked on this, but you came in exactly the right time. So thanks so much. We really appreciate you, Alison Williams, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Analyst for global banks and asset managers.
This is the Bloomberg Intelligence Podcast, available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live each weekday, 10 a.m. to noon Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business app. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.